Welcome to this edition of our weekly webinar series sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger of China, where we examine the nature of the war the Chinese Communist Party has long been waging against the United States of America, the ways in which it has been waging it, and the remarkable success it has enjoyed in doing so, pretty much with impunity, for years, unbeknownst to the vast majority of Americans. We talk as rigorously as we can about how they've pulled this off by showcasing the techniques that comprise what the Chinese call unrestricted warfare against the United States. And we seek to bring the best minds in America and sometimes overseas as well to bear on the question of what must we do about all this? How can we make sure that the American people understand that we are, in fact, at war? Not because we've chosen to be, but because our enemy has really, from the inception of the Chinese Communist Party, regarded war against the United States and ultimately our defeat as a central purpose of the party. What we should do about it is the topic of today's program. And I'm very pleased to say we have an extraordinarily formidable group of contributors to help us examine this proposition. If the Chinese Communist Party is now in trouble for a variety of reasons, should we be bailing it out? Should we be propping it up in the interest of avoiding the, well, disorder, perhaps chaos, possibly even greater threats, though that may be hard to imagine if you properly understand what the Chinese Communist Party is up to. As a result of it coming apart, it losing power, it being overthrown by the Chinese people. On the other hand, what are the upsides? If we take specific actions of various kinds, which we will enumerate in the course of this hour, that might contribute to the Chinese people at last liberating themselves from truly the most monstrous regime in human history, if only measured by the number of its own people it has murdered. By some estimates, 100 million. Others say, no, 500 million more have been murdered in the womb. Whatever the number is, the toll that has been taken on the people of China is unsurpassed and clearly intolerable. They have ample reason to want to get rid of this regime, as do we. And we will examine ways in which we might make common cause to that end. I'm going to welcome for the first time, I think, to these webinars. If not, it's been a long time since we've had Dr. Stephen Young with us. He is an extraordinarily knowledgeable individual about the history and the culture of the Chinese, well, civilization, going back far beyond the Chinese Communist Party's rise to power. Steve Young has written extensively on this and related subjects, notably in a book in which he talks about human rights in China and Vietnam, and also a book about the betrayal of America by Henry Kissinger, in league with, among others, the Chinese communists. We are honored to have him with us to kick off this conversation with, I hope, a perspective on the nature of the regime and its incompatibility with the traditions of Chinese civilization and the implications were we to side with the CCP rather than the people of China for not just the so-called People's Republic of China, but for us and arguably for Western civilization more generally. Stephen Young, welcome. It's so good to have you with us again.
You've raised, when you talk about Chinese civilization, we're talking 2,000 plus years. We're talking different intellectual, moral traditions, different religions, different Chinese ideas about law, about justice, about rights. What I'd like to start with are two documents, recent documents, which I think are very revelatory of tensions within the Chinese Communist Party, which could be exploited by the United States in order to encourage some Chinese in the party, but more likely outside the party, to change direction. What has disappointed me is that so many people in our national security elite or China scholars and things like this have overlooked these things. Now, one reason is that they're hard to find. The first one is an essay by a former premier of China, Wen Jiabao, a senior man in the Chinese Communist Party, written in April 2021, 4 years ago, responding indirectly in a classical Chinese Mandarin Neo-Confucian manner to Xi Jinping and his vision of both China and the Chinese Communist Party. And what Premier Wen does is he goes back to an ancient thinker, Mencius. And that in itself is significant. His essay is about his mother. It's a filial remembrance of his mother. As I recall, it was published in a small newspaper in Macau, which was then it disappeared. It was on the web for about 10 hours, but a number of people made copies which were circulated so you could read it. And he uses indirection. But a key to his indirection is the Chinese character Ren, which means a person, human person. It also stands for humaneness. And he talks about, he says, my mother taught me how to be Ren. Interesting, he's not talking about his father. Traditional Chinese authority structures are patriarchal. He's talking about his mother, who taught him how to be a human person. Now, if you're educated in Chinese philosophy and history, you should immediately think about the opening paragraph of the book of Mencius, where Mencius says, the only things I have to teach are Ren-yi, humaneness and righteousness. And he is staking a claim that the Chinese people, the Chinese culture, should focus on humaneness and righteousness, not on power, not on authority, not on hierarchy, not on war, not on conquest. And at the end of his filial remembrance of his mother, Premier Wen writes, that China, in my mind, should be a country full of fairness and justice, where there is always respect for the human heart, humanity, and the essence of human beings, and where there is an air of youth, freedom, and struggle. I have cried out and fought for this. This is the truth that life has taught me and that my mother has given me. This, to me, offers we Americans opportunities to engage with the Chinese people over and above, behind the back of the government and the Communist Party, by saying, we Americans, we applaud this. We believe in this. We want to work with a China which is humane and righteous. And there would be, I would guess, millions of Chinese, particularly many intellectuals, of whom they're my friends now, but their mouths are closed because of surveillance. But this is what they believe. The Chinese Communist Party is, to this extent, out of sync with one of the main moral traditions of the Chinese people. There's another tradition we can talk about later on with our colleagues. Okay, let me now turn to a second document. December 16th, 2024. This is an unsigned document that was circulated privately among many Chinese, did not appear, I don't think it was on the internet at all. Written, my instinct is it's written by people in the military, because starting in December, last December, and some of other people know about it, there have been many rumors coming out of China about the military, particularly one senior general, Zhang Youshua, standing up against Xi Jinping and saying, no, the military is not going to follow you in your road of sort of domination. Implicitly, your desire to conquer and capture Taiwan. So this document requires the resignation of Xi Jinping, all his party roles, government roles, and military. And it lists in about 24 paragraphs all the bad things that Xi does. He violates the principles of separation between party and government, destroying the term limits for leadership, undermining the principle of democratic centralism, promoting a personal cult, disrupting political order and norms, seriously damaging unity between the party and outside the party, attempting to achieve comprehensive control over everyone, in diplomacy, lacking integrity, morality, and the rule of law, lacking empathy, not understanding or addressing public concerns, vain, stubborn, never admitting mistakes, even when facing a wall, believing himself to be the greatest contributor to the nation, unmatched in capability, and once in a millennium emperor. They then compare him, he says, because of his policies, China is in decline. The writers then compare him to the 4 worst emperors in Chinese history. They also conclude, we demand that the country use this opportunity to abandon the current system prone to autocracy, establish a new democratic republic society where everyone can enjoy a free and open life. Now, we can have questions as to how influential these people are, and those are very valid questions. But I think this is evidence that we Americans should not write off the Chinese people or Chinese civilization. We should rather accept it on its best terms and say, this is what is great about you, and we admire this and we want to work with you. So that would be my recommendation, to use whatever we want to call it, intellectual outreach, cultural exchange, political warfare, but to go to the people themselves and say, this is why you are a good people, not that way. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Steve. I know one of our colleagues, mutual friends, Dr. Bradley Thayer, has made the point, really a variation on the theme of, I think, your first one. Chinese communism is a foreign ideology. It is a product of a totally different culture, a totally different civilization, and that one of the vulnerabilities of the party that, as you've indicated, we could very usefully exploit if we are in fact aligned with the people of China, if we in fact understand that we have a mutual interest in seeing the CCP terminated as the ruling force in China, to make this case that this foreign and essentially really incompatible ideology is one of the reasons why that kind of change is both very legitimate and urgently needed. Could you speak to that point?
I think Brad has a good point, but it's complex because the Chinese civilization itself over history is complex in having different traditions. So briefly, communism, as I think everybody knows, was not invented in Asia. Right? Communism is invented in Western Europe. The classic statement, the Communist Manifesto by Engels and Marx, Marx being a German refugee in the UK, this is a Western tradition. Now, it gets picked up in countries around the world, basically by whom? One could even argue even Russia. I mean, the notion of that the Russians would be the first, Russians, an agrarian, non-capitalist society, would be the first to become a proletarian communist society, struck a lot of intellectuals and others as odd. But why? Because an elite, Lenin in particular, who'd studied in the West. In China, you had Mao and the other founders of the Communist Party who were looking for something from the outside, I think, because they didn't like what they saw on the inside. So they borrow something from the outside, and in Asia, we also see this very much in Vietnam. The Communist Party founders can say this notion of organizing based on class will give us a better, brighter future. And the West is more advanced than we are. They've invented the Industrial Revolution. They have railroads, they have telegraph, et cetera, et cetera. So we will take this and we will bring it to our country, our society. By the way, the Japanese did the same thing, only they brought in capitalism. All this is happening late 19th, early 20th century. But it does open up a sense of why do we Chinese have to borrow this? Don't we have things in our own past, for example, Mencius, where we can treat people fairly? Mencius, by the way, in his writings, he's a supporter of capitalism, free markets, the right of people to work and produce. They don't have to be told what to do by the government. There is, Frank, but I do need to say, a very strong other Chinese, very Chinese tradition of autocracy, of hierarchy, starting from the emperor and creating a bureaucratic structure under the emperor all the way down to the family. One of the moral propositions that Chinese tradition used was filial piety, that every Chinese as a child, you have to respect your father. That principle of being ordered about, the father then has to respect the family head, the clan head, the district chief, the district chief, the province chief, the bureaucrats in Beijing, the bureaucrats to the emperor has to respect heaven. And that has been a powerful force in China for a long time. The question is, in the 21st century, in our globalized world, can we as non-Chinese respectfully work with intellectually Chinese to say, you don't have to keep that top-down hierarchical autocratic tradition. You have things which can open up the way things got opened up in the West for capitalism, for free thought, for free universities. So I think there's a way of gracefully and with respect pointing out that the Chinese should go back to good core Chinese values and not take things from the outside unless they fit with a good moral Chinese sense of service and humaneness and righteousness.
Thank you so much, Steve Young. We really appreciate this important insight into a line that can be utilized to try to affect the change that would be the antithesis to propping up the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to go to a videotaped interview that I did on our Securing America program earlier this week. It appears on Real America's Voice. I encourage you to watch the entirety of it. It was with one of our most important members of the Committee on the Present Danger China, one of our most faithful contributors to these webinars, in fact. That would be Captain James Fennell, United States Navy retired. He was in his last duty station in the Navy, the Chief of Intelligence and Information Operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. These days, he is associated with the Geneva Center for Security Policy and is the co-author with the aforementioned Dr. Bradley Thayer of a very important best-selling book entitled Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. Let's go to the video with some relevant excerpts from the conversation I had with him about today's topic. Should we prop up the Chinese Communist Party?
There's been a lot of reporting over the last 6-8 months in the light of some of the removals of former and current, or now not current, but military PLA, military officers. That has led to a lot of speculation that the Chinese Communist Party and Xi's control of the party is not strong. It's also led to people to suggest that his control and leadership of the PLA is not strong. And from my perspective, I don't concur with those assessments. There doesn't seem to be any indicators, substantive indicators, that he is off message. So if you look at his time in office, 13 years, he's on a trajectory that you can measure, and he doesn't seem to be off of it. He doesn't seem to be being detracted from it, whether it's in the military domain or in the political domain, like with his proposal of the Global Governance Initiative now and his 4 major initiatives that he's promoting through the United Nations. Yes, they have some economic problems, and that's an area where we need to continue to look, and where I applaud President Trump and the administration for corralling the Chinese Communist Party and putting pressure on them. I would like to see a lot more, which gets to kind of the point that you were discussing in your opening, which is there a threat, or is there a risk if we apply too much pressure, both economically or militarily, that we could either, 1, strengthen Xi's grip on power, or 2, that he could lose it all and then we could face something much, much worse. And my assessment is that we're in an existential fight with an ideology called communism, as practiced by the Chinese Communist Party. It's different than the communism practiced by the Soviet Union on the edges, but its core objective is to destroy the United States of America and everything that we stand for in our Declaration and our Constitution and what we've stood for 250 years. So I think the risk of not taking action is greater than the risk of taking action. So I'm glad to see the president go before the United Nations like he did this week and tell the people of the world, hey, you want to buy windmills and you want to buy solar panels, but you're buying them from China. Is that really a good idea? And clearly he was suggesting that it wasn't a good idea. Clearly he doesn't agree with China's views on a lot of things and the trade imbalances that they've been doing with us. And it seems clear from his statements about wanting to strengthen and rebuild our military that he's concerned about the PLA and their growth. So I would say that it gets down to a method. So I don't question the administration's intentions or their view of China. It's a question of methods. And while I'm not the president, I would, it's up to him to make these final decisions. And we're getting these releases about restrainers and deflators and other kinds of actors, both that are inside or around the edges of the administration. And I would say, 2 things. We need to be cautionary about taking everything that's said about the upcoming national defense strategy is selling out. I want to see that, because I don't hear that from people that are inside the system still. I hear the exact opposite. But I would also suggest that we should be, or we can be, open to doing much more in terms of putting pressure on the PRC and the military domain. And so I think that we should be doing that. I think for instance, we're sending increased levels of U.S. warships, destroyers and frigates through the Taiwan Strait. How about we send a U.S. aircraft carrier through the Taiwan Strait? How about we check the PLA and the Chinese Coast Guards threatening of the Republic of the Philippines, our treaty ally at Scarborough Shoal. We saw 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago the Chinese use a destroyer and collide with their Coast Guard cutter and cut its bow off. They could have easily done that to the Filipinos and killed Filipino sailors, which President Marcos had said would be crossing a line for them and an act of war. And by treaty, our mutual defense treaty with the Philippines, the United States would have to defend against that. So I think we could do some more there. There's some areas where we could take some lessons from Europe in terms of NATO, in terms of how we organize our alliances in Asia to better confront China. So I would just say that we need to keep our jackboot on Xi's neck, and if we can break his neck and break the Chinese Communist Party, that will be better for America. That will make America better.
Captain Fennell, let me just pick up on that point. I'm not sure that we've got the jackboot on Xi's neck at the moment. There is a powerful argument to be said that's where we should be, but the question isn't so much is that the case as it is how firmly planted is his jackboot on our neck. And this goes to this issue of the risks associated with inaction, or worse, perpetuating this regime. Could you talk a little bit about the extent of this unrestricted warfare, both of the pre-kinetic kind and the possible shooting war variety that may be in the offing?
Because of our heavy investment from Wall Street into China, we have essentially paid for them to build this military that is now outclasses us in certain areas, key areas in the Western Pacific, notably in the maritime domain now, and in the air domain and the strategic rocket domains. They're approaching us in space and in cyber. So we have a huge problem that we paid for with American money. And the people that are going to pay for it in American blood are going to be the sailors and Marines and soldiers and airmen that are stationed out there should a shooting war go hot. We've also talked about the number of Chinese nationals that's come across the border. They will be involved in any kind of conflict, destroying our rare area. We need to do more. So when I say jackboot, I would like to see it a lot more active. We still have a big presence in the Pacific, but there's more that we should be doing. We are watching China advance rapidly through this decade of concern, and they're building carriers, they're building missiles, they're building fighters and bombers and stealth fighters, stealth bombers. They're advancing in every realm of military warfare, political warfare, cognitive warfare, economic warfare, and we are not recognizing the threat for what it is. And this is alarming to me. We've got internal threats in America, no question about it. But these threats from the external, from China, are not going to sit in a vacuum and just stay on their side of the Pacific.
That's for sure. What we're talking about is our side of the Pacific and the implications of their various forms of warfare against us right here at home, as well as against our interests elsewhere. We've talked a bit about some of the forms of warfare that the Chinese are engaged in and the need to counter what they're doing culturally, as Steve Young has talked about, militarily, not shooting, but in terms of having the capacity to deter the Chinese militarily that Captain Fennell's just described. We wanted to turn to another of our Committee on the Present Danger China members and very faithful contributors to these programs, Trevor Loudon. He is our duty expert on the manifestation of the unrestricted warfare that has resulted in what the Chinese call elite capture in our country on an industrial scale, in basically every sector of our society, from Wall Street, as Jim was just talking about, to business more generally, to academia, to the media, to political life particularly. What that does in terms of decision-making about whether we recognize we're at war, whether we do anything about it, let alone the kinds of effective things that we're discussing here to bring down the Chinese Communist Party rather than prop it up. And we are very appreciative that Trevor is taking the time to once again visit with us about what these enemies within represent in terms of both threat vectors for our mortal enemy to utilize, to weaponize against us, and impediments to our taking the kind of action that's needed, as opposed to assuming that we need to accommodate, appease, indeed prop up our mortal enemy's regime in Beijing. With us, Trevor, who has written extensively on these subjects and made movies about them, including Enemies Within the Church, Security Risk Senators, and the counterpart on the House side, House Un-Americans, to both talk to us a bit about the importance of resisting, not appeasing, the CCP, and a political warfare, if you will, lawfare approach that could be very helpful in terms of taking down the CCP. Trevor, welcome back. Over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Frank. Well, first of all, I'd like to address a major misunderstanding that has guided much of America's foreign and economic policy regarding China for decades. And that is the idea that was common in the 80s after Deng Xiaoping opened the Chinese economy, that the Chinese weren't really communists anymore, that they've abandoned communism, they've seen the light. This was the line that Kissinger sold Nixon, that we can make the Chinese more like us. And when Deng Xiaoping started to open the economy, American business people were very happy to go in there and exploit the cheap labor, etc. And this was seen as a win-win. They were becoming more like us, and we were making money with their cheap labor, and it was all good. A basic understanding of Marxism would disabuse you of that notion. A classic Marxist would say there are 5 stages of human development. There is primitive communism, where you live in a cave and you go and kill a woolly mammoth and you drag it back and you share the meat equally amongst you. That's primitive communism. Then the second stage is feudalism. You start to develop agriculture. You have plots of land and they get raided. So you need warlords to protect your patch of land. You know, China was a feudal society before the revolution. Warlords all over the place. Russia was a feudal society too before the Soviet Revolution. The third stage is the growth of capitalism, where people start to, banks start up, you start to get intellectual property, machinery, capital development, and that's the stage that booms the economy, that absolutely produces all the wealth. Every good Marxist acknowledges that capitalism is necessary to build the economy before going on to socialism. And the fourth stage, but see, capitalism, the Marxists will say, breeds inequality. And so, therefore, to correct that, you must have a strong government, a socialist government that redistributes wealth, and then that government will wither away to form your advanced communist society. That is basic Marxism. So when Deng Xiaoping opened the Chinese economy, that wasn't a capitalist thing. That was a return to Marxism, because they all acknowledged, as does Vietnam, which is doing exactly the same thing, that Mao made a huge mistake in trying to go directly from feudalism to socialism. He missed out the capitalist stage. They didn't have much wealth and everything imploded. Big mistake. So they had to go back to the capitalist stage, and we were happy to finance that. Now they have built their economy so big that they can challenge us. But it doesn't mean they're off the communist road. As a previous speaker pointed out, they are absolutely committed to world communism and to the destruction of the United States of America by any means they possibly can. But this is something that hasn't most US policy makers don't understand. I'm not sure President Trump understands this. He thinks that the capitalism in China is a genuine, permanent phenomenon. It isn't. It's already going to the socialist stage now. The government is reasserting control. They're militarizing the economy. They're getting ready for war. I'll also point out that the reason the Chinese have used their businesses to move into the United States is not to make money for not so much to make money, it's to get political influence. In my book on Kamala Harris, Stealth, I quote a top Chinese advisor to Xi Jinping, saying the purpose of having Chinese businesses and organizations in America is very simple. We want businesses in all 435 congressional districts, he would say. That will give us political influence in every single congressional district in the country. We will start plants. We will start factories. That will get many Americans dependent on us for their salaries. Therefore, no American congressman will dare to criticize China, because they might lose the votes of the 5,000 or 6,000 people in that district who depend on us. The goal, he said, is to make the Congress of the United States a subsidiary of the Chinese People's Assembly. So we've got to get rid of this idea there's ever going to be peaceful coexistence. Communism is a religion. It's a millennialist religion. They believe in complete world domination. There can be no other outcome, and we are the main targets. Now, as Frank said, how do you get rid of this? Well, we've got our restrainers in America, and our restrainers, the Quincy Institute, many people have infiltrated Trump circles are restrainers. These are people who believe we should not confront either Russia or China. We're best to let the Chinese have their sphere of influence, the Russians have their sphere, and we'll have their sphere. Before World War II, these were called Lindbergh isolationists. And they told everybody, no, we don't support the Nazis. We don't support the Nazis. We just want to keep America out of a European war. Well, the leader, Charles Lindbergh, got medals from the Nazis. He was absolutely a Nazi sympathizer. And I'll say right here that most of these restrainers who believe we should not confront Russia over Ukraine and other adventures they're doing, and they're looming attack on Poland in Central Europe, and we should not be aggressive with China. We should try and keep the gravy train flowing, are captured elites. They're either in Russia's pocket or China's pocket or both. That I'll say that very, very boldly. So how do we get rid of this? Well, we've got to apply we've got to basically use the same kind of tricks that you would use against organized crime. The FBI, under proper direction, now has the opportunity to form a new unit inside the FBI, which is completely dedicated to foreign infiltration, Russian, Chinese, Iranian, and Cuban, etc. Its job is to root out foreign infiltration and those who are working for our enemies, domestic people working for our enemies. And the principle is quite simple. It's how you take down the mafia. You'd form a new unit. It's like the Untouchables, very vetted, very disciplined, very compartmentalized. So if you get any rotten apples, that wouldn't do too much damage. Then the president could declare a 3-month amnesty for all foreign and domestic foreign infiltrators and spies and domestic traitors. If you're a foreigner and you're working for a foreign government, whether it's Iranian or Chinese, you've got 3 months to leave the country and never return. Because if you are caught after 3 months, and we can convict you, you're going to Leavenworth for the rest of your life, and there will be no prisoner exchanges at all. That's part of the deal. All domestic traders have got 3 months to come into the FBI and register your name and spill your guts. Tell everything you know, who you betrayed, who bought you, who you bought, what you stole, who you influenced, your networks, what you were part of, how you got inveigled into this. Were you a knowing traitor? Did you get in a business deal you didn't understand? Were your relatives threatened? Come forward, and if you are honest and are willing to testify in court, you'll get immunity from prosecution. Your punishment will be between you and God. But if you're not coming forward in 3 months, we'll have so much evidence, and if we catch you, you'll join your Chinese and Russian and Iranian friends in Leavenworth, and you can play checkers with them till the end of your natural days. That would cause a massive meltdown in every foreign intelligence network in the country. You would see tens of thousands of Chinese, if not hundreds of thousands of Chinese leave. Iranians would take off, Russian mobsters, cartel people. You'd see a whole lot of big tech people stand down. You'd see a whole bunch of Wall Street guys stand down. A whole bunch of senators and congressmen would stand down for family reasons. And you would have a flood of information into the FBI on exactly who the traitors are. You get them to rat on each other. You have a big carrot and a big stick, you get them to rat on each other. In 3 months, you'd cause a massive meltdown in all these networks. You'd have so much evidence. The American public would finally understand how deep the corruption and the infiltration is, and would then support the measures going forward to make sure this never happens again. I think this has been proven time and time again with organized crime. We've got, as Frank often says, the CCP is a massive organized crime network. We have to use the same tactics against them as Giuliani used against the mafia, the British used against the Thuggy gangs in India, and Thomas Dewey used against the Murder Incorporated in the 1930s. Start catching the low-level rats, get them to flip on the high-level rats, offer a way out, and prosecute those who you really need to prosecute. That's what I'm recommending and promoting, and I hope the Trump administration starts to do something along these lines.
Trevor, thank you so much. I did want to shamelessly plug a book that we developed, Dee Dee Logason and I, based on the first 70 or so of these webinars, entitled The Indictment: Prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and Friends for Crimes Against America, China, and the World. And it was really inspired by precisely the kinds of recommendations that Trevor's just made again. And I ask him to do it practically every time he appears, because I think it's such an urgently needed line of action against the Chinese Communist Party, and one that every American can help with, not least because of the opportunity that it affords for crowdsourcing the kind of situational awareness about the threats we're facing that is so urgently needed. We're going to conclude our program, as we often do, with remarks by yet another of our most important members of the Committee on the Present Danger China, yet another of our most faithful contributors to these webinars. The more extraordinary because typically when he does it, it's the middle of the night where he is in the Far East. His name is Colonel Grant Newsom, United States Marine Corps retired, a man of considerable accomplishment in uniform, and also having retired from the service as a Foreign Service officer in our Tokyo embassy. He has been an entrepreneur and businessman in East Asia for some time. He writes brilliantly on these topics in a number of outlets, and also in a best-selling book of his own entitled When China Attacks, A Warning to America. We look to our friend Grant Newsom, as always, to synthesize the most important points that have been made in the course of this program, but of course also to speak from his own experience about the necessity of taking down, not propping up, the Chinese Communist Party. Colonel Newsom, welcome aboard, sir. Over to you.
Well, thanks for having me, Frank. I've been hearing for years the line from civilian officials, academics, military officers, we can't do anything to destabilize the People's Republic of China. And the question you ask is, well, why? And the best they can come up with is, well, they've got nuclear weapons, and who knows what would happen if you had chaos in China. Well, one thing, you've got chaos in China already, but I would also point out that Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and that's chaos personified. The North Koreans have them as well. But that's the line is, we just can't do anything. It's almost a dogma that we have to do everything we can to prop them up, just as amazing as that is. And keep in mind that I can't think of a single case in history when one nation has actually done as much to build up an enemy that says that it wants to destroy them. It just doesn't make any sense. And if you don't believe me, I always turn people to Document 9, which is a speech Xi Jinping gave around shortly after solidifying power. And in it, he basically says, either our system's going to survive or the American system is going to survive, and it's going to be ours. And they're very clear about it. They're just telegraphing their punches. So they want to destroy us. And we've done our best for the last 45, 50 years to actually ensure that they have a stable platform from which to operate. And there's a certain condescension, of course, to all of that. This idea that, well, the Chinese could never be our equals. They'll never, we'll always be ahead of them. But also it's been incredibly effective psychological warfare on the part of the Chinese Communist Party to capture American elites, influential people in business, government, everywhere, to think that we have to keep the People's Republic of China sort of stable. Trevor mentioned very nicely this idea that, well, China's not really communist. You hear that all the time. The Chinese would be surprised to hear if that was the case, but you hear it a lot. And I would look at additionally, the financial support that we have given China and still do. It goes back quite a ways. I would cite Hank Paulson, formerly of Goldman Sachs, of course, and also Secretary of Treasury. He did so much to help the Chinese financial system, which is basically a Ponzi scheme with a currency that is not convertible. He did so much to help them survive that sort of rickety sort of financial foundation. That was maybe 20 years ago. But now you have J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, helping a Chinese battery company, CATL, that has direct ties to the Chinese military, helping them raise money. And this has just happened the other day. So that hasn't really stopped. Militarily, unfortunately, even back in Ronald Reagan's era, we were giving the Chinese advanced torpedo technology, or teaching them how to manufacture artillery shells well. And just about every administration since then, until the Trump administration came along, has done something to militarily bolster the Chinese Communist Party. It seems that engagement is the order of the day when it comes to the military. I would cite another example of this is around 2008 or so. The then commander of U.S. Indo-PACOM, Admiral Keating, was asked, well, what do you think about the Chinese having aircraft carriers? And he said, I don't see any problem with it, and I would be glad to help them as much as I can. Fast forward a few years to 2013 or so, and I asked a senior general at PACOM again, I said, why are you appeasing China? And he didn't challenge me on the idea of appeasing. He said, well, what else are we supposed to do? Go to war with them? Well, I could think of a lot of things in between appeasement and thermonuclear war, but that was the idea, that we could not do anything that would upset the Chinese. And around that same time, a few years later, I remember another general saying, well, we're trying to give the Chinese off-ramps, as if they didn't know what they were doing. And so anything the Chinese did, we would not challenge it, and we would not do anything to destabilize that regime. Even now, it seems as though the engagement school is coming back in the part of the U.S. military. And I would really encapsulate the U.S. approach to China during all these years with a statement by, he was then Assistant Secretary of Defense, Joseph Nye, an Ivy League professor, who said, well, if we treat China like an enemy, we'll be sure to have them as an enemy. So we're going to treat them like a friend, and then we'll at least have the chance that they might become our friend. And that was pretty much it. So you see what kind of a mess we've got in, having created an enemy, a country that could defeat us militarily and that economically is as much as a match for us, to put it mildly. So that's all the complaining. Now, what do you do about it? The first thing is we do have to rebuild our military, but also you have to decide that, we're going to bring down this regime. It's out to destroy us, and we're going to do that to it first. Ronald Reagan got it about right when he took over and said, in terms of what they were going to do to the Russians, well, don't do anything that helps them. And he also said, as his outcome, we win, they lose. But you have to see that. There's no splitting the difference with the People's Republic of China. Additionally, in addition to a proper military, you do need to go on the offensive in terms of political warfare. And one aspect of this is propaganda in the good original meaning of the word, the Jesuit meaning, which is just explaining yourself. And I would cite as one example, it's just one example, was the then Deputy National Security Advisor, Matt Pottinger, giving a speech in Chinese directed at the Chinese public, What he was doing, and this wasn't even his job, he was showing what the U.S. government should be doing. And we had people supposedly responsible for this sort of thing against the Chinese, but it's not clear what they were doing, if anything. But you also have to, besides the sort of the propaganda end of it, stop providing financial support to the People's Republic of China. It's about that simple. Stop providing technology to them that they use, one, to build up their economy, but also for military purposes, the dual use technology. There's an awareness that this is a problem, but in terms of doing enough to stop it, we're not doing anything like that. But also exploit the fissures in the Chinese system. Think about it. You've got, at least by China's own admission, 600 million people living on $5 a day. It's doubtful that they're all that happy with their lot in life. This is something you exploit. Additionally, there's a north-south split in China, and you go down to southern China, and you will hear the Cantonese say that Xi Jinping wants to make us go extinct, not just our language, but us. Well, that is something that any just reasonably alert sort of political warfare type could exploit and cause the Chinese no end of trouble. Additionally, there is a real desire, as Steve Young said, that Chinese want to be free. You would get the impression that there's this unique species of people that like to be mistreated, like to be governed with a boot on their neck. Well, Jackie Chan has said that. But why not ask the Chinese people themselves? And these are all things that say that we should be addressing and using it to destabilize that regime. But also the last thing I would suggest is make it personal for the Chinese Communist Party's leaders. And that is exposing their obscene wealth, much of it that is parked overseas in the United States, Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom. Make this public, and also seize it and cancel the green cards their relatives have, and expose it to high heaven so all 1.4 billion Chinese know about it. There was actually a law passed a couple of years ago in the US requiring the intelligence community and the State Department to provide a report on this. And it was actually passed by then Senator Marco Rubio. And finally, it came out a year late. And what it was 4 pages of gibberish. And that's all it was. And this was the intelligence community giving the US Congress both middle fingers. But we were just too afraid to do anything with it or whatever reason. And as a result, we once again squandered a chance to really cause the Chinese communists some trouble. And have we recovered from all this? I don't think we have. You'll notice the other day that Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, in his conversation with his Chinese counterpart, he stressed at the very beginning, we don't seek regime change in China. I don't know where he's getting his advice from, but that's the wrong approach. At the bare minimum, you would say, as long as you're trying to change our regime, we're going to change yours. So that's just a few ideas on the topic, and hopefully we wake up and do things better.
Colonel, thank you very much. This I think just perfectly captures what I hope we would do today, which is both to establish that there is the potential of bringing down the Chinese Communist Party. This is something that I guess alongside the idea that they're actually not communists any longer, this is a moment when we have the opportunity to take actions. And I'd like, Trevor, if you would, to ask you to elaborate on this point about the restrainers. Could you talk a little bit more about them and their agenda as you see it, sir?
The restrainers is a growing group inside the foreign policy establishment. It's coming out of the Quincy Institute and many other similar organizations. And their basic belief is that the United States should no longer should certainly not challenge Russia or China or even Iran, that we're far better off just being fairly isolationist, allowing the Iran to control the Middle East, allowing Russia to dominate Europe, Eastern and Western Europe, and China to dominate the Asia Pacific region, and therefore that will bring us into an era of peace and harmony. That if we're nice, if we just have a nice foreign policy, the Russians and the Chinese will stop interfering in our affairs, will stop challenging us, and we will all, turn into hippies and sing songs and we'll all live happily ever after. The restrainer movement is heavily tied to organizations like NIAC, which is the National Iranian Action Committee, a wing of the mullahs. The Quincy are tied to even organizations like the Institute Parties, which has been well known for its Cuban and Russian intelligence ties for decades, but it's infiltrated the libertarian movement, it's infiltrated some of the think tanks, it's infiltrated some of the well-known conservative institutes. The American Conservative publication, it's called The American Conservative. It's completely a restrainer, isolationist magazine that actually platforms Marxists. The restrainer movement is tied to Marxists who pose as conservative, try to tell conservative Americans that we got to do this America first thing with no foreign ties, no foreign allegiances, abandon NATO, all this kind of thing. And it's an extremely dangerous movement, and it is tied to our enemies and is operating just like the pro-Nazi isolationists did before World War II. And the isolationists, by stopping us dealing with Hitler early when we could have stopped him in his tracks, made World War II more inevitable and much worse than it had to have been. And the isolationists today, and we know many of them, the isolationists today are actually endangering America, weakening America, and empowering and encouraging our enemies, because I can tell you straight, if we allow Russia to dominate Europe and China to dominate the Middle East, it's going to be 5 minutes before they join together and gang up on us. And that's the plan. That's the scam that is behind this movement.
Well, and I think, Trevor, as you know better than anybody, they have already joined forces and are, I think, moving against us. Indeed, much of what we've been talking about on these webinars in the past year or two has been the extent to which the Chinese Communist Party's strategic arson under Xi Jinping has created conditions under which that Russian, salient in Europe and in the Middle East, the Chinese and Russians to varying degrees. Well, distractions from the main thing, as Jim Fennell likes to say, in the Far East.
Well, I'd just like to add, the big propaganda meme of the restrainers is, don't be aggressive with Russia, we'll drive them into the arms of China. They've been in a full partnership with China for 35 years now. They have military exercises, an intelligence sharing partnership. So they said, we can't challenge Russia, we'll drive them to the arms of China, we need to concentrate on China. But now they're saying, no, we shouldn't really go after China either. It was a scam from start to finish. We need to aggressively confront the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians. We have the advantage in many areas. We can finish Reagan's job of taking down the evil empire completely with the help of their own people without hardly firing a shot. Wouldn't that be something to hand on to our children and grandchildren? A world where the evil empire has finally gone.
Grant, I think you might have been seeking recognition, and I do want you to respond to that if you would. But also, if I may just add a point to your observation about the so-called cattle financing deal, where by Jamie Dimon's JP Morgan and Brian Moynihan's Bank of America, as you pointed out, raised over $5 billion for a company identified by the Pentagon as a Chinese military company operating in the United States. I just wanted to add that another $500 million has been raised in the past few days for a company called Hesai that is involved in a number of lines of work, including LiDAR, which is a powerful sensing technology with a lot of military applications, also identified by the Pentagon as a Chinese military company operating in the United States. And honestly, Grant, I can't for the life of me figure out why there's any of those, let alone that we are underwriting them as we are. But to your point, this is evidence of that captured elite. This is evidence of the corruption that is undermining our freedom of action. And I would just invite you to speak to this point that some people may dress it up as an ideology of restraint. Others are, I think, simply working for the other team. And your further, thoughts as to how this will be our undoing if it is allowed to persist in a policy environment like today's.
Yeah, I think it comes down to basic human nature. When a certain type of person, particularly Westerners, smell money, they perform like a sea lion at SeaWorld who thinks he's going to get a mackerel snack. You can always rationalize whatever it is you're doing. You always can. And I've seen this over and over when I worked with a Wall Street firm. There's no way that you can stop it by appealing to people's sort of sense of decency, patriotism. It has to be some coercive steps. And will we have those? Well, I don't know. When you consider that we still will not delist Chinese companies on US exchanges, even though they were listed despite meeting none of the requirements that any other country from the United States or anywhere else would have had to meet. We still can't do anything about that. And that gives you some sense of this so-called elite capture. And I would note, read some of Trevor Loudon's books, read Peter Schweitzer's books on these topics, and they lay out a prosecutor's brief. And what happens? Nothing. So that's where we are. And additionally, the Department of Defense or the Department of War, they should be raising merry hell about all of this, not getting in bed with these people. So you ask yourself, you look back at every chief of staff, every senior military officer who served in the last 30, 40 years, and every one of them should be ashamed. Not one of them has ever spoken up about this, but it continues. And exactly how it's going to end, I don't know. There's a sense, well, we can keep it up until the shooting starts and we can no longer cash our checks. Well, we've usually had the chance to recover in the past. I don't know that we would now. So it is pretty easy to be depressed about that. And even good people on Capitol Hill who are trying to do something about this, they find themselves stymied. But if this isn't addressed, don't be surprised that when the shooting starts, that we're on the short end, and that we cannot recover. And that's assuming we're even able to fight back. One thing I'd like to throw in that goes back to the earlier question about the restrainers, the isolationists. This was a couple of years ago, and I was in a small group meeting, and I won't say more than that. But it was with somebody who was advising the U.S. military and was in line, I was told, for maybe in a position in an administration that was going to come. And the person said that we should not defend Taiwan because the Chinese military is so strong that where they would defeat us and the humiliation would ruin our global reputation. Therefore, don't defend Taiwan. And you hear variations of that. It is just absolutely defeatist. And in this particular case, the Chinese, I know, were playing on this person's vanity rather successfully and some of the access that they offered to this person. But that's where we are. It's troubling, to say the least, and I don't have to say more than that.
Well, Grant, I just would make, I guess, the obvious point, though. If you actually abandon your ally, that's not going to be so good for your reputation either, I don't think.
Well,
Indeed,
this is what
it will have established that you are irrelevant to the future of the region, at very least, and possibly, worldwide. Could I just also mention, and perhaps if you care to respond, but a zenith of clarity in this administration about the nature of the war we're in with China and what we must do about it was not to be found in national security, strategies and the like. I guess there's another one coming, and we'll see what it ultimately says. But rather in something called the America First investment policy. And it was a national security presidential memorandum number 3, I think, issued at the end of February of this year by the then very new Trump administration. And I have to tell you, it read like a paper by the Committee on the Present Danger of China. In fact, I think that probably a fair amount of it was cribbed from those papers that we've done over the years on the specific point that you've made now repeatedly, Grant, and rightly so. We are underwriting our mortal enemy. We are enabling it to have with our pension funds and mutual funds and other investment vehicles the kind of military that will defeat us if we're not careful. And I don't mean simply defeat us in terms of what they will do to our carrier battle groups in the Western Pacific, which is try to sink them, but also to us here at home. And the fact is that while the president laid out this brilliant plan, it has not been implemented. As far as I can tell, it's not even been responded to by the various agencies he tasked with doing just that, including the Department of Defense, Department of War, if you will. Nada, zippo, crickets. And in the absence of that, it's business as usual. And I think the business is one that is benefiting the enemy, as we've talked about, and will be our undoing if it is indeed allowed to persist. I just wanted to close this program with a final comment about the fact that the president, if he does not get information like we've shared with you today, and if he is instead essentially hearing mostly from this community of restrainers, who, by the way, and it is a rather stunning fact to share and tell, as I think Trevor mentioned, came in significant numbers, or at least into significant places, from the Quincy Institute and other Koch Foundation-sponsored enterprises. The president, at the end of his pre-inaugural time, post-election, issued on Truth Social a statement that could not have been more clear. He said, in a kind of memo to those who had worked for the Kochs, don't even think about applying for a job in his administration. Now, again, as with that American First investment policy, I think this was a very different kind of approach to national security policy and finance, for that matter, than what is being followed now. And as he told us frequently, he learned the lesson in his wilderness years that personnel is, as Reagan used to say, policy. And unfortunately, I believe that his administration has been penetrated by people who did not share his vision of America First. It is indeed the Lindbergh America First, not the MAGA Trump America First policy. And it is at risk of being enshrined if the president does not hear what is being said here today, which is A, there is an opportunity. We don't know how enduring it is, but for the moment, there does appear to be an opportunity to actually take advantage of difficulties Xi Jinping and his party are in and work with the Chinese people against the Communist Party. We have the opportunity to act differently than to just prop up the Chinese communists again. We must seize that opportunity. I want to thank all of our speakers, the inimitable Steve Young, Captain Jim Fennell, Trevor Loudon, Colonel Grant Newsom. You are the best of the best, and we appreciate your time today. We appreciate all of you tuning in. I hope that you will distribute as widely as possible this very important conversation, and that in other ways you will go forth and multiply. God bless you all. God bless our country. Over and out.